Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Earth Day Eco-Anxiety workshop. My name is Emily Farjou. I am a program manager at Earth Day Canada. Earth Day Canada is a Canadian environmental organization whose mission is to help individuals, organizations, and municipalities reduce their impact on the environment. Every year, we release a media campaign for Earth Day on April 22nd to bring awareness to environmental issues and to mobilize as many people as possible. Our 2022 campaign highlights eco-anxiety, a little-known mental health issue, even though we are talking more and more about it as more people are affected by it. And a recent study actually indicates that 45% of Canadians experience it regularly. Eco-anxiety can manifest itself through various symptoms such as sadness or anger, or even insomnia, and it relates to our concern about climate change. You may have actually felt this recently after the announcement of the Bay du Nord oil project, or after the release of the latest IPCC report. I know I did. With this campaign, we invite you to address your eco-anxiety by taking part in collective and positive activities. And this workshop explores how eco-emotions can be a vital source of energy for making change. And to talk about this further, I'm very excited to have Jennifer Chestnut, environmental educator and activist, with us today to walk us through these eco-emotions and how to navigate them. Jennifer is currently studying emotional responses to environmental challenges as part of a master's program in education, in sustainability, creativity, and innovation. She's also a facilitator in the Work That Reconnects, a peer-led group process that supports moving through eco-despair to empowerment. Take it away, Jennifer, and let's remedy together.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Emily, for holding space for us with Earth Day Canada and the welcome and the warm introduction. And welcome to everybody in our seminar here today. I'm honored to be spending time with you as we explore these deep issues and what we really love about our planet and our desire to make change. So I will just share my screen and we will dive in. Just a moment, please. So, and by the way, happy Earth Day to everyone, wherever you are across the country. April 22nd, a time that's been celebrated since the 70s, and it's just mounting, excuse me, in energy and dedication as more people gather. So let's do the share screen again and dive into eco-emotions. So thank you very much to Earth Day Canada for the invitation today, and also to the London Public Library for your support. Okay, so as Emily shared, and as we all know, we're going to explore together eco-emotions and really looking at, finding our way through these emotional responses to the state of the planet together. And, the purpose within this is to care for our well-being and the well-being of the planet, and to not go alone in this territory. And I want to just give an extra shout out to everybody for joining a session around eco-emotions. It's not yet normalized in our culture, but as we see, more and more people are talking about it. And I believe it'll be a part of a mainstay of environmental engagement, caring for our emotions as we move forward in this century. And as Emily shared, I'm an environmental educator and activist, and I just want to give you a little bit more background on like what really brings me to this question and what I see from these fields emerging with emotions. Because as an environmental educator, quite a bit like the late great Bell Hooks said, education and the classroom is a space, it's kind of a social laboratory where you really see impacts from society in community and in young people, and you see the impacts, especially when you teach things like climate change and water and human rights like residential schools, etc. And that has been my work for the past 10 years with youth. And as well, since 2019, I've been co-facilitating a climate crisis course for high school teachers who are interested in supporting young people in upper high school who know the issues, who are part of climate movements and want the adult world to be there with them and support them and look to their teachers for information, support, and care. And so in these processes, I've noticed that, both with young people and with teachers, who want the best for their students, that there's a sense of real overwhelm in the issues, especially in the last few years. And, of course, as adults who care for young people, we don't want them to remain in a state of overwhelm. And also sometimes you see when you start studying the issues, you also see a resignation that these issues are so big, what can I do? And again, like, for adults who are working in solidarity, we do not want this outcome, of resignation, especially for young people that are starting their journey with life. And so instead, we want the outcomes of empowerment and connection with nature and feeling that things are possible. And so this led me to dive deeper and to explore what people need when they look at these issues. So I want to share some things from my personal experience today, exploring these issues. Also, as a young person, I look back when I was a teenager, and this whole process began for me then when I was having ecological nightmares, and just learning to put some of those feelings into paintings and to poetry, and then eventually studying critical issues at Trent University. Of justice and environment, and then going on to be an activist in my community with the London chapter of the Council of Canadians, and seeing in public events how emotions arise in groups after watching films and discussing and exploring issues. So I've seen it in different contexts. There is really this field of emotion that emerges. And so what can we do with these emotions, and which emotions can help us ride into empowerment, and which emotions overwhelm us and make us just kind of frozen? And I want to explore that today. And finally, as Emily shared, the past 2 years, I've been just now finishing up a research project on emotional responses to climate change and how to support young people. So I'll bring you a little bit of that research today as well. So when we think about our emotional responses to the state of the planet, we might, feel very alone. And in fact, in society, if we don't see this mirrored back to us, other people feeling these things, discussing these things, we really feel extra isolated. So today, in solidarity with some other events across the country, I want to help normalize our emotional responses and talk about their challenge and also their value. And you might be having emotional responses or maybe not. And maybe it's loved ones that you see that are having these emotional responses. We definitely don't need to create the emotions. They might be there, they might not be there, and either is okay. We are integrating a lot of issues in a pandemic, in global insecurity for various reasons. And so it's totally normal not to be having them too. And before I go further, I guess I also just want to mention that, the ideas that are shared today are shared in a spirit of care and concern, and just sharing things from personal experience and professional experience. And so some of them might really resonate with you and be helpful, and some of them might not. And so, of course, we all have emotional and intellectual sovereignty. So please feel welcome to use anything that is useful to you and just leave anything else in the Zoom room if it's not useful. Okay, so yeah, approaching them in public, because it is not yet a norm, although the pandemic has made us braver and more honest in talking about suffering and not pretending, you know, in like the Western cultural view that we're all just strong all the time and successful and powerful. That's not really the reality of human life. So with the pandemic, you know, there is this growing openness to talk about suffering and name it. We don't want to stay there. The purpose is not the suffering. The purpose is to move through it together. And I find that this metaphor that I want to share with you today from Plum Village can be very helpful as we get, you know, into zones in talking about emotions in public. Now, Plum Village is an eco-centric tradition. People practice that are youth with this tradition. People practice that are educators. People practice that are families. Everybody across the world, religious and non-religious, practice in this popular mindfulness tradition. And it was started by the late, great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King in 1967. And anyway, Thai, as students of Thich Nhat Hanh call him, Thai would often say that our emotions are just like weather. So like a cloud, you know, we might wake up in the morning like, oh, feeling very cloudy or foggy, might pass our consciousness, or, you know, and then a half an hour later, we start feeling sunny. And our emotions are really just energy in motion. They come and they go. They are not permanent, they are impermanent. And so it's helpful to keep that in mind, especially when we have like strong ones bearing down on us, like eco-anxiety. And yeah, we can use this metaphor to discuss emotions. So I invite you even to pause to just think about, okay, well, like, what is my weather like right now in this moment or today, you know? And so for me, life has been a little bit busy lately. So I woke up a bit cloudy. I gotta say there were some clouds. And then I was thinking about Earth Day and hearing the birds outside, and could see the sun peeking out in the corner, and it's getting sunnier and sunnier being with you folks. But yeah, weather can be a comfortable way for people to express things without feeling like they have to be too personal. And on top of, you know, our just life journey realities of emotions changing and coming and going, there's also, of course, the complex emotional landscape that we're living in today. Probably there is no other time in history where our human ancestors or our animal, plant ancestors, anybody faced such a challenge of an emotional nature, of a social nature, of an ecological nature, of a political nature, and economic nature. So let's keep that in mind with ourselves, right, as we go about our days, day by day, that we're in challenging times. We're in challenging times. Now, of course, these times aren't without great meaning. It's also an incredible time, I think, to be alive because of the time period that we're in and the choices that we make and the way we build collectivity and move together to make change is very meaningful, even if these are small actions or big actions. And a little bit later, I want to talk about action as a remedy to eco-emotions. But I want to just point out and piggyback on what Emily shared, you know, in the opening, that you know, with Canada, our nation being, you know, one of the top fossil fuel producers on the planet. And of course, fossil fuels emit greenhouse gases, carbon, etc., into the atmosphere. And that's changing our planet, it can just be disturbing to have that knowledge. And it can be really disappointing when we hear of some choices like the Bay du Nord project, which will put 73 million barrels approximately, they're anticipating, of fossil fuels and greenhouse gas producing oil into the atmosphere. And that on top of the recent IPCC, which was a very big warning from Antonio Guterres that it's time to shift and to join and recognize that our atmosphere out of balance cannot continue to hold more fossil fuel projects. So I definitely, Emily, you mentioned your emotions to that news in the last couple of weeks, and I felt the same, and maybe some of us as well on this call have felt that too. So sometimes we just need to take a breath, right? Because we participate and we're involved in system change and personal change. But there are real challenges. There are real challenges. And so our weather, can get a little bit heavier with some of the news. But let's talk about eco-emotions. That's what we're here for. We want to learn about eco-anxiety. We're going to learn about eco-grief and apathy as well today. But I want to start with probably, I suspect, what is our favorite eco-emotion? It's definitely mine, and that is the love and the connection that we feel with our living home. Maybe favorite species that we have that bring us joy, maybe special places that we go to that relax us. We're so lucky living on Northern Turtle Island to have such access still to the living world, unlike many other places around the world. And this can give us strength. And I think even just like pausing and bringing our special places to mind. Like I'm thinking about the Great Lakes watershed because that's where I live. And I'm thinking about right now about Lake Erie and how I love to go to Port Stanley in every season, even in the snowy kind of like ice, and walk on the beach and look out at the water and the sky and the clouds, and how it just brings that sense of expansion, the way the clouds do that and the sky, or maybe if you live in mountainous Canada, the way the mountains give you strength, and that sense of awe and beauty and wonder. And I think because of the time period we are living in, that we should make use, if we're drawn to it, to all our mental and imagination capacities to help us shift state and fortify ourselves to face tougher questions if we're drawn to that. So I call in Lake Erie, I call in my favorite location. I invite you to, if you want to call in your mind and your thoughts, your favorite places that make you feel whole, or whatever strengthens you. Yes, because now we're going to talk about some of these difficult emotions. So eco-emotions, are really just a range of feelings. Feelings that we're used to in life, right? We have these feelings at times. We have anxiety, we have sadness, anger, fear, overwhelm seems to be particularly prominent. And these are being documented and largely seen across the planet, whether we're in global north like ourselves or global south, whether we're feeling direct impacts from climate change in our communities or indirect. People are expressing different emotions. Now, these are very normal, healthy, and appropriate responses to a serious problem. They're not abnormal. They're not a sign of weakness. They're accurate responses. But we know that they're difficult. And we're seeing the discussion happen more on things like eco-anxiety. And so we see, this is a phenomenon that needs to be discussed. For example, there's the reference there about over a 4,000% increase in eco-anxiety references online. And youth, young people, they are seeming to bear an extra burden. There's definitely an intergenerational injustice happening with climate change and definitely with well-being. And so I want to share with you a study that came out. You may have seen it or heard about it. Various places are reporting it quite a bit this year by Hickman and al. It was a study published in various journals like The Lancet. And this was a study where from 2021 where 10,000 youth, pardon me, I'm going to take some water. Water from Lake Huron. That's where I get my water from. Okay, so this is a study of 10,000 young people, ages 16 to 25. They were randomly selected from countries in the global north and the global south. They were not like climate activists. They were just random youth who agreed to participate in this study. And they were asked questions about how they feel about climate change and how they see adults and especially government responding. And this was the results. So you can see here on the right is percentages of these 10,000 young people, what their thoughts were on climate change and like emotional responses. So the first one says that 83% of young people surveyed say that people have failed to care for our planet. And this one I found, very significant. The next one, 75% feel that the future is frightening because of climate change. And it goes on to other results for young people and this burden that young people are carrying around ecological grief and anxiety. They were also asked about their thoughts on like how it's being handled and how they feel about, the solutions and how it's being handled in the policy by government. And 65% of these young people shared that, they feel that governments are failing young people. 64% felt that the government is not being really honest about the impacts of the actions that are taken about their policies and their effect. And 60% feel that, their distress is really being dismissed. It goes on, feelings of betrayal that young people have as well. So this is like a devastating report, but maybe not a surprise for many young Canadians across the country who are feeling these things and want adults to know and just want adults to take action and dealing with this betrayal. And this, as climate therapist Hickman from the Climate Psychology Alliance in Britain shares, this is like about moral injury that they feel and also about like a sense of betrayal from the adult world. So this is pretty important information. It's not happy information, but it's meant to draw our attention and meant for us to know it. So as we were talking about, and we can see from this study that this is not an individual thing. It's not individual young people having issues or many older people who are having these responses. It's really inner responses that are arising collectively. And these responses are often like in our culture, like mistakenly privatized. This idea that like, oh, my emotions are just me. It's part of like a weakness. That's not what's happening. They're really an indicator of awareness. And when we like see these kinds of studies and recognize that eco-emotions are really social phenomena that are happening to us inside, they're a source of like a social problem, then this can take away stigma and we can just recognize it for what it is, a collective problem that we all need to deal with. That would be a great benefit to deal with. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, eco-emotions can exacerbate already like mental health, like challenges that we're having, stress that we're feeling or depression, anxiety and things. So we want to like choose how much we interact with them if we're in a sensitive time, getting support. And I'm going to talk about support and care and kind of making choices. I mean, nobody needs to work through their eco-emotions, although we'll see from the literature that mental health professionals are really like sharing in consensus that when you work with them, they're less of a burden. But we need to make choices for ourselves that make sense. So on eco-anxiety, eco-anxiety has been like conceptualized in different ways. We've been hearing, I know, and today, you know, we're talking about like that 45%, you know, of Canadians that are feeling eco-anxiety, and that can show up as like a dread or a doom. And it's true that the American Psychological Association, you know, terms eco-anxiety as, you know, far on the spectrum. It's the doom and the dread that we feel, fear for our environment and our home in the future. But eco-anxiety is also conceptualized to as like on a spectrum. And maybe I'll go back to that slide for a sec, like on a spectrum of like being worry and anxiety and just like not quite at the doom level. So some of these levels are easier to interact with and that energy can be used for change, and some of them need more support, like feelings of doom. I also like Bednarik, who's also from the Climate Psychology Alliance, which is an awesome like group of mental health professionals working on climate. They have a lot of resources. You could easily Google them and find some. And there's a North American branch, which we'll share later. Emily's going to share in the chat later a link to a directory of climate sensitive therapists. If we feel like we're more at the doom level and we need some professional support, there are some climate sensitive therapists with the Climate Psychology Alliance. So Emily will share that. But I like Bednarik's pointing out that, you know, it's really like a heightened mental, emotional, and also somatic distress. We need to remember that stress lives in our bodies, and so our bodies need care. This issue that we're calling it to attention today of you know, remedying together by, you know, acknowledging the sickness we might feel and calling in sick together, it really does affect our whole sense of being. I want to now talk a little bit about grief, because it's also important to recognize when that shows up, and we work with grief in different ways too. So it has a lot of names in the literature, in books, and in academia. The names are not so important. You can see them there on the slide. It's more the phenomenon of understanding, okay, this is a phenomenon that's happening. It could be happening to my loved ones, or it's happening to me, what have you, just to recognize and normalize and acknowledge when people are experiencing this, as opposed to like disregarding people's experience. And so different people call it different things, as I said, environmental, climate, and ecological grief. Let's just look at the definitions a little bit, because it helps us kind of understand the phenomenon. So the first definition around environmental grief came from studies in earlier decades, you know, when people were having responses to orca whales being captured and put into like parks, and kind of experiencing the grief that they saw in the orca whales being taken from their habitat on the West Coast. And so, yeah, that's where this term came from. But environmental grief can really relate to the loss of ecosystems or animal life or plant life, and the destruction of the planet in general. Great, and I see some of those links that we're going to talk about are being posted. Awesome, thank you, Emily. And another definition is climate grief. And Running, who is a climate scientist who actually worked on an earlier version of the IPCC reports, talks about the grief as like different emotions. He relates it to like grief, relating it to like how we experience. It's different than grief when we lose a loved one, but they're drawing similarities to how we might experience denial and anger and depression and go through this process. And yeah, this can be helpful to keep in mind that grief isn't just like sadness. And finally, I want to draw your attention to Ashley Consolo's research. She's a Canadian researcher out on the East Coast, and she is really drawing forth this conversation on eco-emotions and making a lot more people aware in our nation. And her work is around ecological grief. And she points out with her and her colleagues like Ellis that ecological grief can come from like experienced losses that we feel from the forest fires in BC, or from like melting ice in the Arctic, various Indigenous communities as they go through that process and experiencing that great loss firsthand. But also actually ecological grief is also an anticipated grief. So people around the world are reporting grief symptoms and grief processes from not actually personally experiencing climate change or even a lot of environmental change or drastic change in their own community. So we should really keep that in mind, that grief can be and anxiety can be from direct experiences or indirect experiences, like just watching the news. The other emotion that I want to talk about today that I think is really important, whether we feel it or not, to like what we're seeing in our world around us, is eco-apathy. So yeah, maybe I'll just have you reflect for a moment to yourself about like, okay, where do we see eco-apathy and how does that feel to us? Yeah, so I know like many of us who are engaged in different ways environmentally, it's like frustrating, like, why aren't more people involved? Why aren't we acting, you know? And we hear this message so much from youth for very good reason. But there's been a lot of study joining like environmentalism, climate communication, and psychological research in understanding that eco-apathy can very much be a normal response to these complex issues. So it can show up as overwhelm. It can show up as like distancing from the issues. It can show up as like a feeling of helplessness, like, yeah, I care, but I don't know what to do. It can show up as like denial and even like this paralysis, you know, so people are experiencing that. And I think an interesting thing about the recommendations around apathy, and I can really relate to this myself, is that different mental health professionals talk about like the remedy to apathy being feeling the grief and like going through the process of like, oh, okay, I'm worried, I'm feeling these emotions. And that can kind of like break up like kind of the feeling of shutdown or like distancing when we engage our feelings. But I want to just acknowledge eco-apathy because sometimes it looks like people even in our own families and lives like aren't participating enough, and it can be like we can be scared about that or we can be frustrated about that. But one dynamic could be eco-apathy. So that draws other questions of like, how do we engage people, right? How do we engage people with compassion and understanding? And one of the major ways that I think it's easy to become apathetic and just like feel helpless, for sure, I feel helpless sometimes, and despite the engagement, you know, is from the news. Because our news system works in such a way that it focuses on, in environmental issues, it focuses on like the disasters, the critical moments that we see. So a lot of people get their news and those images that come to their mind and play in their mind from the news, which is just the catastrophe. And that's not really, it's an important part of the story. We need to know what's happening to our planet, but there's like a broader picture. There's like a wider lens because there's catastrophe, but there's also solution, and there's communities that are rallying and people with bravery and creativity and intelligence, and you know, people like Earth Day Canada that are organizing together, all sorts of folks in North America and around the world. So let's just do a little experiment, talk a little bit more about the news and how that can impact us. And so, you know, we've heard a lot of like painful news stories around Earth. increasingly in the last few years. And there's different communities across our nation that are really suffering. And so we hear the stories, but, you know, again, we need to hear the solutions and the support and the compassion. And so I just pulled up a news story that is sad to share. And this is just a little bit of reporting about like wildlife dying in our national parks in like Banff, etc., you know, from like humans traveling, train or car, etc., and deer dying and moose, etc. And I looked at this report and then I'm like, okay, well, I wonder if anyone's doing anything about it. So I also looked up some other information. I think I found this one on the Good News Network on the right. And this on the right is showing an overpass. Several overpasses have been built since this study in our national parks or in response to this information about wildlife dying. And many wildlife have been saved and are using these overpasses. Right, so deer populations have been greatly saved by these overpasses and other technology like this. So yeah, so I invite you just to like notice, like when you hear the story on the left, how does it sit? And when you hear the story on the right about the changes, you know, how does it sit? Does it give you some energy or a little glimmer of hope? And so it can be very helpful to look up other stories and to seek out reporting that reports the shift, the change. We might call this shift the great turning. That's one of the phrases. It's a phrase I really like. It comes from the Work That Reconnects and Joanna Macy's work, and this idea that, you know, we are part of a great turning. So we can see here, you know, just a little reporting on a soccer club that went carbon neutral, changing, you know, adding renewable energy and like changing to a lighter impact from plant-based eating, etc. So I don't know about you, but I liked hearing that story. From another great news source that's reporting on climate solutions and environmental solutions called Good, Good, Good. And we'll give these links in the chat today. Of solutions reporting. So here a woman in Kenya opened a factory that turned plastic waste into bricks. And so, you know, hearing the upcycling stories, right? Seeing how our waste becomes use, that can be really empowering to know about that. Harvard agreed to stop investing after a lot of like pressure from its students and faculty after, you know, years of investing in fossil fuels. This is an amazing movement that's just really getting a little bit more attention in the news, but definitely one to check out to know about the solutions. And this is the Rights of Nature movement, giving nature and ecosystems legal standing. Corporations have legal standing, and unfortunately, our environmental policies cannot protect from rights of major transnational corporations to, you know, to drill or to extract oil or to extract water from water bottling companies. So this movement is in response to that, to say, you know, we need to have balance and we need to protect for all of our lives and well-being nature. And also nature has a right to exist on its own. So Panama is a recent country that is incorporating rights of nature into its law. And they're joining several other countries like New Zealand and Ecuador. So how do these stories land? You know, this kind of reporting, how does it make you feel? And lots of other stories, you know, about like things like solar and wind are now have become so cheap and being made more and more that there's the capacity to just, you know, shift to solar and wind power now and, you know, use our subsidies for renewable energy instead of, you know, traditional energy that we've been using. So yeah, I think it's just really important to be aware of the emerging movement of solutions reporting, because, you know, we can share these stories with our friends, our communities, and get on these sites of reporters who are recognizing, and news agencies that are recognizing that the impact of the storytelling is great upon citizens. And so there's a responsibility to tell the fuller picture and the solutions. I do just want to mention burnout. We won't say a lot about it, but I know people on here, some of us, some people will be very involved in environmental action. And so if we're looking at the issues all the time, we can experience symptoms of burnout. We can feel tired. We can feel like overwhelmed. Like it's a bit like apathy, but it's like from like a lot of engagement. And that's because, you know, when we engage, there's great emotions happening too. So something just to think about in our communities, in our NGOs, and in our movements, or if we do things with our family or friends, is to just care for our emotions too, you know, and like take breaks. And so we'll also share a link by a series on burnout from Emma Louie, who's writing for activists about like protecting from burnout and having a more holistic response in our environmental communities, our NGOs, and our movements. Okay, so those are the emotions that I wanted to share today. I'm just checking out the time. So maybe I'll talk for about 7 more minutes, and then we'll open it up if there are questions. We can open it up if there are questions. You can put them in the chat. So maybe I'll invite Emily to open the chat soon if you'd like to, so people can start writing questions, and I'll kind of see if there are questions and I can address those. If not, I can share a little bit more. But I want to draw back to like, why are we responding so strongly? Why are these emotions so rich and so big at times? And so I just want to stop and consider, you know, the meaning of these emotions. Like really, we wouldn't be feeling sorrow, grief, or sadness if we didn't care. When we grieve and we feel sadness and the anger of grief, it's because we care, and it's coming from a place of love. It's coming from what people are framing really as moral emotions. Our anxiety also, we're a species, we can see and sense the state of imbalance. It's coming from, you know, understanding and sensing that there's an imbalance. Our anger is really our passion for justice speaking. This framework comes again from the Work That Reconnects and the work of Joanna Macy. Like here's a book at the bottom on Joanna Macy's works. There's a lot of work out there, but I find this like framework to be really accurate from what I know of my experience and others I've worked with, that these emotions are coming from really like beautiful places and important places. And so like, what is the value of expressing these emotions? It's not just like there's a value, and we'll talk about the value and the help for expressing it for our well-being personally, but there's also a greater extended value for society to express them. It's kind of like ringing a bell. It's ringing the bells. It's drawing attention to the fact that we are having responses that are drawing us in a different direction to make change. I think of Leonard Cohen's song. I was going to play it for you a little bit, but let's stick with the timing here. But you know, the song "Ring the Bell," like it still can ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light comes in. And so, yeah, regardless of, you know, the small ways that we act or the larger ways that we act, we really need to ring the bells on these emotions. And you can see this in evolutionary research. So evolutionary research says that emotions, and particularly difficult emotions, the painful ones, are adaptive. We evolved to feel these emotions as a species, and it has helped us make the changes that we need to make as a species. And certainly climate emotions are a great example of this. So it's so important that we talk about these things so people can hear it and hear that it's important and feel like it's okay to act. And several like key psychotherapists, psychologists, mental health professionals like Leslie Davenport, Caroline Hickman, many others are saying that, you know, it's a substantial block when we don't express these emotions, when we don't talk about the vitality of what this means. This isn't just policy. This isn't something out there. This is something vitally important, and we are changing, and the government needs to come with us. But let's talk, because we are feeling these things in our personal lives, right? So let's talk a little bit about some suggestions on how to deal with these eco emotions. Then we'll swing back together at the end on like why they're important for society and why they have value, even though they're painful. So we can care for them. I mentioned like when I was a young person, how I would put my emotions into paintings when I had ecological nightmares. And the arts can be a great container for emotions. We know that in different arts that we might do. And maybe we don't do arts, but maybe that might be a good place to try and practice and experiment and have fun too. Poetry, there's some great poems out there. I've used poems for years to be a container for my eco emotions. You know, people like Mary Oliver. And music can be a great way to express. And this is actually from a movement called Sing from the Climate. And I might actually come back and end on that before our discussion, because there's a great video there. I mentioned the Climate Psychology Alliance, that there are some climate sensitive therapists. We'll share that link. Mindfulness, you know, different traditions of mindfulness. I gave the example because I like to practice in Plum Village of like just mindfulness for my feelings, you know, and just like recognizing, like breathing in, I'm aware, you know, talking to my grief, I'm aware my grief is there, breathing out, I hold my grief, breathing in, hello to my sadness, breathing out, I smile and care for my sadness. So we can use different mindfulness techniques that we're drawn to help us bear these emotions and shift them like clouds. Nature relationship is so important. You know, we do still have a lot of access and a lot of intact ecosystems in different regions of Canada. But it can be sensitive, right? Because it can also bring up some grief at times. So, you know, going to those places for nourishment and caring for even like at our window or plants or pets and stuff, different ways that make sense to us that give us strength. Above and beyond all the care, there's two recommendations for mental health professionals. They say we must talk about them. They say, you know, talking about them makes us less overwhelmed. Learning to cope with the feelings we have about climate change ensures that we don't become overwhelmed by these feelings or burn out. We can keep functioning well in our daily lives. And then, of course, they also talk about breaking the collective silence so that more and more people see it as a risk that requires action. So I guess like talking is even an action, right? But they also say to channel that energy into action, to move from that sense of like, okay, worry, to an action that makes sense. And different actions can make sense to us depending on what we're into, right? Like in the Great Turning, there's so many ways to participate. We might be a person that's strong to activism, that whole resistance, slowing down the troubles of the world, or we might be someone that's into like building change, like building gardens and communities and, you know, creating stuff, or also imagining and just like shifting our perception. So there's so many ways to take action. Today, around the world, and certainly in Canada, there's so many actions we can take. And through the month of April and through the whole year, I just posted a few that I saw on Earth Day Canada's website. And yeah, we don't often talk about it, but I think taking care of our emotions and making shifts in our thinking and using our imagination is so important. So finding our way through eco emotions, we need to care for them. We need to talk about them. And we need to act on them. And whatever we do when we work with eco emotions, we shouldn't go alone. Don't go alone with it. This is not a private, personal deficit. We are in this together, and we need our capacities together to make the shifts and to care for our feelings in community. Ashley Consolo, the researcher I was mentioning earlier on ecological grief, her and her colleagues report, also in the Lancet, that recognizing that emotions are often what leads people to act, it is possible that feelings of ecological anxiety and grief, although uncomfortable, are in fact the crucible through which humanity must pass to harness the energy and conviction that are needed for the life-saving changes now required. So in our eco-emotions, there's a lot of energy. You know, if we can normalize them and move with them and move through them in community, there's so much vitality there. And that is just, I guess that's why I need to talk about this topic, because that is absolutely what has driven me to act for the past 20 years through my professional career and personal life, is the ecological grieving that I have moved through and am not weighed down by. I don't fear it. It's just part of the process because I move through it, and sometimes it revisits. But in that energy, you know, and I think of some of my friends who use anger and use different emotions in mounting civil society responses. There's a lot of power there. So we can work together. We can learn about eco emotions. There's a lot of great books out there right now. So many. We can join groups. You know, there's groups that are moving through eco-anxiety to action. The Work That Reconnects is just one, and we'll post that in the chat. Climate Conversations is a group led by a psychologist in New York, and it's online and anyone can join, and it's free, and you can have climate conversations, climate emotion conversations, and she leads you through videos. Reading news, the solutions, we'll post those as well, different solutions-based networks, and just remembering that we are all in this together. So, Emily, I'm thinking about questions, if there are questions. I'm also thinking that to share a little video possibly might be a good way to end on. Should we open it up to see if there are any questions right now, or go to the video? What are your thoughts?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Jennifer, for this great presentation. It felt really good to hear about eco-emotions and how we can navigate through them. I know I've definitely experienced a range of emotions that you talked about today, and just, yeah, being here with you, with everyone, definitely helped with that. So yes, the Q&A is open for questions. The chat is also open if you want to share some experiences around eco-anxiety or eco-emotions. If you have questions, you can put them there as well. We have about 5 minutes left in today's workshop. I don't see any questions at the moment. So maybe if people want to take some time, if you want to share that video in the meantime, we can do that as well.
Sure. Okay, yeah, so I'll play this video. It's called Sing for Climate, and you know, it's like expressing our emotions through song, right? And music is such a way that we all like enjoy life and enjoy the ups and downs. So this is a really cool organization. It's from Belgium, and like tens of thousands of people in Belgium created a video. They got into choirs and they sang for the climate, and then they brought it to their government. So just a kind of smart form of organizing, but you can also see them moving through their emotions. So yeah, I'll share that. And then, you know, if people do want to ask anything, then I can come back to that with the question. It's a lot to take in, right? And I just shared like a lot of information with you. So I know it is a lot, but thank you, Emily. I'll go and turn to that video now. We'll just need to find it again in my slideshow, so just give me a moment. And I welcome, if a question does arise, then go right ahead, put it into the chat, and I'll come back to it. It's just a very short video. Sing for the climate. So There it is, and now I'll share my screen with you. Okay. All right. Oops, it just switched on me there. I don't know why. Just a sec. Okay, Sing from the Climate from Belgium.
We need to wake up. We need to wise up. We need to open our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now. We're on a planet that has a problem. We've got to solve it, get involved and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that video. It's very energizing, and we can really feel, yeah, people's emotions in that video. It's really good.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay.
We
So-
do have a few questions that came while you were playing the video, and as we were talking about music and the art, someone is actually asking about this industry that is really only peripherally conscious about climate impacts, and how we can agitate for better practices in the arts, in the music industry.
What an awesome question. And what, any industry that we work in is an angle in. And, I think as we see more musicians bringing climate further into their work, what is that? The rap artist. There was a big song a couple of years ago where a whole bunch of, if anybody remembers the name, a whole bunch of artists got involved and sang around Earth, and Earth being our home. It was a really a funny kind of wild video. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name right now. If anybody remembers, put it in the chat. But yeah, I think, bringing forth the artists that are doing that work and just kind of normalizing it for people, and making the risk be easier for people. But also at the same time, we need to take risks ourselves to show that it's possible, right? What's common in education is to build nature relationship. And I do that a lot with students too, but I also know that they need to be prepared for their future. So I take a risk there, right? Being engaged means we take a bit of a risk ourselves, right? So, but normalizing it, bringing forth those artists that you respect that are already doing it, we definitely can agitate in that way. Yeah, blessings to you in that great question and that challenge and that work forward. Other questions, Emily?
Yeah, there are a couple more. We can take some extra time. It's already one, but let's take some more time to answer those questions. And actually, a similar question on maybe how to interact with politicians, you know, who may say they're working on making changes, but may not really follow through. How do we yeah, help them interact with them to actually make that change?
That's such a great question, right? We could have a whole webinar on that, like lobbying to like make change. And I have that question in my life too. And when I do lobbying, I have that question. And so I can't speak with authority. I can just speak with my own experience. And what I found was really helpful is before I would lobby city council, because we lobbied city council on trade agreements, and we got them to pass an exemption, to request an exemption from a trade agreement that could be very disruptive ecologically to our city and socially. And so what I find is useful is being holistic in our lobbying, like trying to generate that compassion. I do feel frustration for sure, and I share your frustration, but generating compassion and thinking about and seeing that they're in a system that's a little bit tight, right? And so they're like told to like give certain like things to say that we know aren't the full truth. And so like going in and seeing their humanity and trying to have a conversation where we just bring forth the truth of how we're feeling and what's real. And we also consider, you know, the position that they're in. And I don't know, I would just lobby with bringing forth that energy of compassion and like connecting in the heart. And so people like, there's Activism for Introverts YouTube of some UK organizers, which is a really good video to check out about organizing with heart, as opposed to just like coming on the critique, but building common ground. So what would they care about within the issue of climate? Yeah, good luck with that. Great question and great place to move forward, like in shifting how we interact with our elected officials. Okay, Emily, was there one other question?
Yes, there is one question, and I think it'll be the last question for today. It's a little bit different. So how this person is asking how to disentangle my fears about food security and food networks from my struggles with disordered eating. How can we bring these two together?
Well, first, I just want to say, like, bless you, right? Bless you in the challenge of disordered eating that, you know, is quite a widespread phenomenon, but painful, you know, and bringing that with your care for food security and engagement. And, you know, we can't say that these struggles are small or are not painful. They really impact our lives, and stress can like add to disordered eating. So I think, you know, what you're doing now, like talking about the realities, is important in safe environments that we can do that in, and reaching out to people and letting our community know. Maybe that's just a close friend or a family member, right, of the struggle, and normalizing that. I know normalizing my struggles has been really helpful, like normalizing anxiety. But also sometimes we just need some extra support too, you know, if we can find the right therapist. And maybe if we feel we're at that level, and I mean, that might not be for us, I just find it helpful to chat, you know, with therapists, especially like a climate sensitive therapist or like a socially conscious therapist, and social workers can be really good at that to help us detangle. You know, we might need a professional space. Yeah, because, you know, I and all of us here, you know, we're citizens engaging, trying to work through these struggles that impact our personal experience, and trying to find healing for our planet and ourselves. So, you know, bless all of us, you know, with the struggles, and I wish you all the best with that. And yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for your questions. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here today and talking about this very important topic that is eco-anxiety and that are eco-emotions. We've reached the end of the workshop today. So again, thank you all for coming to talk about this with us. Thanks again, Jennifer, for your presentation.
My pleasure. It's my pleasure. Yeah. And thank you to Earth Day Canada and you, Emily, for holding space. And I want to wish everybody happy Earth Day and to remind ourselves that we're in this together. We're not alone.
Yeah, exactly. Happy Earth Day, everyone, and take care of yourselves.
Bye.
Bye.